Dear friends, welcome to another episode in the fantastic military world. In this video, we will talk about the intensification of Russian attacks on the Ukrainian combat front, with Vladimir Putin racing against the clock before the arrival of military aid from the United States. Last Saturday, April 20th, the United States Congress finally approved the nearly $61 billion package of military aid to Ukraine, a package whose approval had been delayed since October of last year. Because of all this delay, Russia, taking advantage of Ukrainian exhaustion after the tremendous effort during the failed offensive launched in June, began a series of attacks and offensives that resulted in some victories, such as in Avdiivka, on the outskirts of the city of Donetsk. With stocks dangerously low, and even worse, with the United States Congress, majority Republican, postponing the vote on the aid package, Ukraine was forced to save its meager military resources, allowing Putin to advance in some sectors. But from now on, with the approval of the aid package by Congress, Ukraine will begin to receive all the weapons and ammunition it desperately needs to defend itself from Russian aggression. However, as I mentioned in a recent video here on the channel, the process of sending this material to Ukraine is very laborious, involving a long sequence of steps that begins with the packaging of everything, the sending of tons of weapons and ammunition by air, and finally the most critical and dangerous stage, which is the reception of this material, usually in Poland, and the entry of all this into Ukraine, which will then be responsible for distributing it to units on the front line. This means that, at best, Ukrainian soldiers on the front line will only effectively begin to receive them within 3 or 4 weeks. Therefore, in this relatively short period of time, Ukraine will continue to be vulnerable, with stocks of weapons and ammunition at very low levels and, therefore, unable to hold off strong Russian attacks. For Vladimir Putin, this is his last major opportunity to attack a still weakened and unarmed Ukraine. If Putin waits a few more weeks, he will find Ukrainian soldiers with replenished stocks, and as importantly, with high morale, knowing they have not been abandoned by the United States. With all this, showing us that the best time for Putin to attack is now. Reports and movements on the ground seem to indicate that this is exactly what he is doing. At this very moment, there is no clear evidence, at least for now, of the beginning of a major and concentrated Russian offensive, as many analysts predict. But the multiple small offensives launched by Russia during the winter, precisely at a time when Ukraine was most weakened, are clearly being reinforced, with emphasis on the Bakhmut sector. The city of Bakhmut was conquered in May 2023 by mercenaries from the Wagner Group, at the time under the command of Yevgeny Prigozhin, on Putin's orders. Last August, after launching an armed mutiny in the city of Rostov and advancing against the Russian capital, Moscow. After the conquest of Bakhmut, that sector remained relatively calm, with the Russians focusing on Avdiivka. However, during the winter, the Russians began a series of small offensives in the region, with one of them against Shazi Vyar, which has clearly been reinforced. Ukraine has reported that at least 25,000 Russian soldiers are currently pressing Ukrainian defenses in that region. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Putin's goal is to conquer Shazi Vyar by May 9th, the day Russia celebrates victory in World War II. Shazi Vyar is a small city, with an estimated population of 12,000 before the war. But because it is located on high ground, its conquest would strengthen Russian positions in the Bakhmut region, making any future Ukrainian advance through the area more difficult, in addition to acting as an important propaganda victory for the Kremlin's propaganda machine. There is also a clear increase in Russian pressure in the Avdiivka sector, with the Russians trying to exploit the recent conquest of the city, while the Ukrainians are still trying to establish a new, more withdrawn defensive line. As I mentioned earlier, for now, there is no indication of an imminent start to a major Russian offensive. Although, as I mentioned in other recent videos, for months Putin has been reinforcing his army with new soldiers and with new Iranian, and mainly, North Korean weapons and ammunition. The goal of this is clear: to launch a new major offensive aimed at reconquering the areas he lost in 2022, mainly in the Kharkiv sector, with many analysts also predicting offensives in the Kherson sector, and even in Odessa. Carrying out an offensive of this magnitude would involve many preparations and, mainly, a large concentration of troops and weapons, something that would not go unnoticed by satellites that are constantly observing the Russian rear. Therefore, at least initially, Putin seems not to have had time to prepare the long-awaited and feared major spring and summer offensive, opting, as I mentioned here, to reinforce the multiple small and medium offensives he launched throughout the last winter. All of this seems to indicate that Putin is currently in a race against time, trying to obtain as much territorial gain as possible before American weapons begin to replenish Ukrainian stocks. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe and activate the notification bell to not miss any news, criticisms, ideas, or suggestions. You can leave them in the comments.